Hello. Today we are going to look at rounding numbers and particularly at significant figures. And to begin with, what we're going to look at is how we would round numbers in day-to-day speech. So over the summer, I might have had a summer job, and if at the end of the summer I had this much money saved in my bank account, €1,073 and 64 cent, if I went into school and I was asked how much money I'd saved over the summer, I would be unlikely to say €1,073 and 64 cent. I would probably round that number to something reasonable to give the person I was talking to an idea of how much money I saved over the summer. So more than likely, if I was asked this question, I had this much money saved up, I'd say I saved €1,000 over the summer. And that would give them a reasonable idea of how much money I had saved over the summer. It's not exactly correct, but it gives them a good idea for how much money I'd saved over the summer. And if I said that, I would in practice be rounding to the nearest thousand. The nearest thousand to the actual amount of money I've gotten is €1,000. If I wanted to be a little bit more accurate in conversation, I might say that I had saved up €1,100, €1,100. And that would actually be more accurate because while I have no hundreds of euro, I have 73 euro. So if I was going to round to the nearest 100, I would say that I had €1,100 or €1,100. So when I've done that, I've rounded to the nearest 100, and that gives them an even better idea of how much money I have saved. So I have the size of the money I have saved, the 1,000, and then I have the specific amount of thousands I am talking about. Or I have the size of the money, the hundreds, and I have the specific amount of hundreds that I'm talking about. And this will be important for when we get significant figures. But we're going to have a quick look at decimal places too. So if I have the number 48.3509 and I want to round it to one decimal place, well, to one decimal place, our decimal place is here. My decimal point is where I go from units to tenths. So if I want to write this number to one decimal place, I only want to write one number after the decimal point, and otherwise write this number as accurately as I can, as meaningfully as I can to represent the number while only using one decimal place. So the 48 is fine, and then I write down the point, and I only want to have one digit, one figure after the decimal point. So there's a 3 there at the moment, but I shouldn't write down a 3 because the next digit is 5 or greater. So I'm going to round this number up to 4 because that's more accurate than saying I have 48.3. Because the next digit here is 5 or greater, I would round this up to 4. And that gives me a more accurate picture of my actual number than if I said 48.3. To two decimal places, I'd say, well, I'm going to write down my 48 point, and then I'm only going to want to write two figures after that, so I'm going to have 48.35, and I don't need to round this number up because the next digit on, the next figure on is 0, so I don't need to round this up. It would be quite accurate to say that I had 48.35 for my number. And finally, I could have three decimal places, so I'd have my 48, and then I'd want to write three figures, three numbers after my decimal point. So I'd have 3, 5, and I have a 0 here, but then the next digit is 5 or greater, so I need to round that up one digit, but I run into a problem in that I have a 0 here. Well, it's not really a problem. I just go up by 1, so I'm going to round the 0 up to a 1. So I have 35.351 is the most accurate way I can write that to three decimal places. Now if we go on to significant figures, let's look at what the words mean. Often in maths, the name of something tells you what it means. We have significant means important, and figure means number or digit. So if we go back to our example of rounding in daily life, the 1 here is the figure that we'd be talking about. So this would be this number to one significant figure. The 1 is the specific size of the number, and then the thousands is the overall size. So if we take this with our number here, 72,000 and 90. What's that number to one significant figure? So I want to write down one number, one figure that's going to tell me, that's going to describe that number other than the size. So we have the difference between the specific number we're talking about and the overall size of the number. When we're talking about significant figures, we're talking about the specific size of the number, not the thousands part. So how would I write this to one significant figure? Well, by far the most important digit here would be the 7. So I want to write down 7 as my most significant number, the most important number for giving you the general idea of the size of that number there. So I have 7, but if I told you that an approximation of this number was 7, you'd disagree with me. What I want to say is 7 is the most significant figure, and then I'm going to round everything else to just being zeros. So 70,000 would be a good approximation of this number if I was only going to use one significant figure, and then I just round everything else to zeros, like I did with my thousands here. To two significant figures, well, the two most significant figures would be either 7 and 2, and I haven't had to do any rounding up here because both of these digits so far have been followed by numbers less than 5. So I just write down 72,000, and that's quite a good approximation of this number. And then three significant figures, I'd have these three figures here would be the three most significant, would be the three most important for describing this number. So I would say I had the 7, the 2, but I don't want to write a 0 because now we have to do some rounding up, just like we did with our decimal places. Because this digit is 5 or greater, I'm going to have to round this 0 up to a 1. That's what I'm going to do. So I have 7, 2, and then 1, 0, 0. That's now a very good approximation of my actual number using three significant figures. And then finally, I have my number to 4 significant figures. So I want to write the 4 most important digits down here to describe my number. And it actually ends up looking identical to the number itself because I don't have to round anything. So I have 7, 2, 0, 9, 0. And those are my 4 significant figures. And then the 0 just comes along to give me the size of the number I am talking about. So that is what we have for our significant figures for bigger numbers. And we can also have significant figures for numbers smaller than 1, decimal type numbers. So what would we do if we wanted to write this number 0.09199 to the nearest unit? So this would be a little bit like our beginning example. Well, the nearest unit for this is just 0. So that would be to the nearest unit. And then to one significant figure. So the most significant figure here would just be the 9. So we have to look at the difference between the size of the number, which we're always going to keep because we're trying to give an approximation of the number. If we were only going to use one digit to describe this, what would it be? Well, that 9 would be the most important digit, and I don't need to round it because the next digit is less than 5. So to describe this number using only one significant figure, I would have 0.09. The size of the number is always kept, just like it was for the larger number here. So what's the first non-size number that I would be dealing with? To one decimal place. So 1 decimal place, this is my decimal place, so I only want to write one number after my decimal place. So that is going to be 0. Well, there's a 0 there, but the next number is greater than or equal to 5, so I'm going to round that up to 1. So that would be to 1 decimal place. Now to 2 significant figures. So 2 significant figures. What are the 2 most significant figures? Well, it's going to be the 9 and the 1 here. Other than the size of the number, these would be the 2 most significant figures, but the 1 is going to need to get rounded up because it is followed by a number that is 5 or greater. So I'm going to have 0.092. So these are the two most significant figures for approximating, for rounding this number. And the three most significant figures, well, this one's a little bit more complicated, but we can have a look. We're going to have, these are going to be our three most significant figures, but we have the next digit on from this 9 is going to be a number that is greater than or equal to 5. So we have to round up this 9, which means we have to round up to here. So it ends up looking quite similar to what we had for two significant figures, but we would actually write in a 0 there to indicate that to a very good approximation, there is actually a 0 there. And then to two decimal places, we would go decimal place and then 2 after. Well, that's just going to be 0.09. We don't need to round up because the next digit is less than 5, 0.09. And then to three decimal places, we're going to go 3 places after the decimal point. So that's going to be 0.092 because we have to round that 1 up to a 2. So that is our different forms of rounding, our rounding in daily life, our decimal places, how we round a particular number of decimal places, past a particular number of decimal places, and our significant figures. What's the most important digits we have to write down to describe the number we are talking about? We always keep its size, but how do we describe the specifics of that number as accurately as we can with the number of significant figures we're asked to use? And that is what we need for now.